I want to chat to you a little bit about the G20, the summit that's coming up here in South Africa. But I want to premise that with something that has been grinding me up the wrong way. And right now in South Africa, what is dominating discourse right across the entire media spectrum, and I suspect that this is absolutely not organic, but it's race and racial conflict, right? Because Trump pulled out of his boycotting, and then Argentinian President, what's his name, Milei, also pulled out. So now it's jokingly known as the G18. I think this is great that they've pulled out, but the reason why Trump pulled out is because he's saying that white farmers are being attacked and the ANC government is doing nothing. Fine. I'm not terribly interested in that. What I'm interested in is why the discourse is so intensely focused on that and the ANC rather than the immense damage that the G20 represents. Because they're going to be discussing sustainable development and more specifically digital ID, social credit scoring.
Every Western country is experiencing the same thing. So we have tensions created within societies, and those are being used to drive wedges between people, and that's being used as diversion for what's actually going on. And we are falling for it left, right, and centre. So it's no different in South Africa. The question is whether it's possible for people to recognise. Look, when we are looking at the information space at the moment, and we all recognise that we are in an information war, or at least we give lip service to the idea that we recognise that we're in an information war. Lots and lots of people aren't prepared to set aside whatever prejudices that they have in order to sort of look at the information war and look at the players on the board, because we've been talking about this since the censorship agenda really kicked off in 2017 or 2018. Just take one organization, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which, and I only keep mentioning them because they are the ones that have specifically stated to what degree they are funding influencers. They have thousands of influencers on the payroll in order to do what? I mean, what could the possible reason be for funding and supplying to YouTube and the other social media platforms this number of people? It can only be to forward a particular agenda, a particular ideology, and so when we are but setting that aside, we're now entering a period where that the effect of those real human influencers is being amplified by increasingly automated systems and AI and bots of various types. So it becomes even more important for us all to be actually looking at the information space and looking at what we're being presented with and trying to work out what's real and what isn't. So, of course, what we're seeing is massive amplification of talking points which are controversial, which cause tension, angst, anger in people, which absolutely get people focused on the wrong target. And that, we have been heavily criticized, continue to be. I mean, I got an email yesterday, the day before, from someone saying, look, I'm basically, I paraphrase, but basically saying, look, I'm still watching your stuff, but I'm not paying for a membership anymore because you're too anti-Tommy Robinson and you're too pro-Muslim. And that's, neither of those things is actually correct. The point is, we're saying to people, it's not a question of being anti one thing and pro another thing. We're saying to people, no, hold on. What we're witnessing here is someone who's playing an audience on one hand and we're seeing a group of people on the other hand, who have all the faults of any other group of people, but they also have a section of their society which has been radicalized and funded and in some cases armed by the governments that are our governments. And so they have a bigger problem than maybe other communities. But that doesn't mean that we have to, take the entire and put a blanket blame culture on an entire community, because that's falling into the trap that's been set for us. And that's the point that we're trying to make. Now, there's nuance in that, and it's but the way that this is being presented and the way that you're expressing this in South Africa, it's being presented the same way in every country, is that it's black and white. And so that becomes a relatively easy thing when people are under pressure economically, they're under pressure for a host of different reasons, to just find a target and go with that target, even though it's the wrong one.
It's a low-hanging fruit.
Well, it's been laid out for people, and that's the problem. And we've got to start recognizing that when something's laid out for us, that maybe that's not the right thing we should be looking at.
Yeah, it reminds me of that whole Antifa thing in where was it, Portland? I mean, that was obviously not organic.
Well, but if you look back at most of the so-called color revolutions and the so-called grassroots uprisings that have taken place right across the world, they have been artificial, and this is just another one. So we're not learning the lessons of history again, in the sense that because it happened in that country over there, well, it's different here. Well, it's not different here. It's exactly the same MO.
Going back to the specifics of the G20, I mean, the way I would consider it is that it is tossing out a classic false binary, because both of the things you're talking about, the business that is actually to be discussed by the G20 and the sort of apparent sideshow, they're both about the same thing, which is everybody look this way at all the important people who are making decisions about your lives, and whether or not you get drawn in by one thing or the other is neither here nor there. It's still a win if you're drawn in, as opposed to thinking, well, hang on a minute, do these people and the stuff that they're talking about and apparently stand for really have a legitimate bearing on my life? And if not, then what am I going to do about that? But there's always a sort of side job. It's a bit like the Will Smith slap at the Oscars. It's the same thing. It's just pulling people's attention in and being able to generate that media interest that ensures that people are going straight over the most obvious hurdle, which is, do these people have any legitimacy? And the answer really, in most respects, I think, should be no.
I agree with Trump's decision, and I agree with Milei's decision. This is a great thing. And imagine how wonderful it would be if all countries boycotted it and there was no summit.
Do you think that would change anything, though?
No, but
right. So look,
it's a form of protest, though.
But it isn't going to achieve anything, right? And this I think is one of the things that people should be thinking about here. Let's say we deal with the migration issue. Let's say we close the borders today, and let's say we expel 2 or 3 million people from the UK. What changes at that point? Nothing changes at that point. That we haven't solved anything by doing that, because what are the problems here? What are the problems that people are actually facing? No high quality jobs. They're facing an energy cost which is off the planet. That's as a result of the structural the structure of the energy market, particularly in the UK and Europe. We're net zero isn't going to go away. Digital ID isn't going to go away. None of these policy agendas that we all recognise are a massive threat to our very freedoms are going to go away. So what we're dealing with, what we've dealt with, if we win that battle, if people perceive that that's a battle that they should be winning at this point, if that's the most important thing for them at this time, if they win that battle, what changes? Nothing, right? Nothing, because we still won't have enough reservoirs to provide the water that we need. We still won't have clean water. We still won't have roads that work. We still won't have potholes filled in. We still won't have, and you can go on with the list. So nothing changes, right? Because the target's wrong, and everybody's focused on the guy in the hotel, or the guy in the temporary accommodation, or the guy that's getting 500 quid to go back to France, or whatever the thing is. That's the focus. And yet the people that are actually causing us the trouble are just continuing on with what they want to do, and nobody's saying a word to them. It is fascinating to me that that people are so caught up in one issue that they're quite happy for the rest to just progress. And they'll say that they're not happy. Of course, they'll say I'm against digital ID, but they're not focused on that issue. They're focused on the migration issue, and that's the only thing they're focused on. And they're looking for Tommy or Farage to come and save the day for them. That's not going to work, because neither of those guys is criticising in any substantive way the bigger agendas that are at work here.
I saw a sort of a microcosm of this expressing itself a week or so ago, and I thought, gosh, that absolutely encapsulates the incredible amount of time, energy and effort that goes into something that yields nothing. And it was in I was driving through Gloucester, and there was a gathering outside the Ibis Hotel, which is being used to house migrants. I don't know if the entire hotel is used for that purpose or what. I'm not quite sure what the specifics are, but it was a classic. It was on a sort of side road off a main road, so it's kind of visible from the main road. And at one side, sort of cordoned off by a police line, were protesters carrying union flags and that sort of thing, making a din. And that is literally what they were doing. I mean, if anyone was there, they'd absolutely be able to back that up. There was nothing sort of constructive or significant being said, as it were, or indeed done. And then there was a gap across the hotel frontage where there was nobody permitted to go. And then there was another police line. And then the other side of the police line was a counter protest, let's say, and the only banner that was legible to me from where I was standing as I'd approached it was just a banner that said "Diversity is our strength." So basically, two groups of people, two groups of brainwashed people, determined that they are, opposing the people on the other side of that police cordon, with a hotel full of migrants in the middle. I mean, what possible result was either of the two sort of protesting parties expecting? And yet that was on I think it was a Saturday afternoon. It had drawn in, I don't know how many hundred, but I mean, quite a significant number of people who have presumably dedicated quite a lot of time and energy into organising it and getting banners and stuff made and all the rest of it, as well as the significant police cost. I mean, they even had a helicopter up, for goodness sake. And and all this goes on, and then at whatever time it just gets collapsed. I don't think there was any trouble, but I mean, apart from anything else, what are the people in the hotel supposed to think? There was no sort of formal or direct communication with them from either party. I mean, so are they supposed to sort of look out the window and think, right, well, those guys on the right sort of, I think don't like us, and those ones do. But actually, what's going to be the material difference to our lives as a result of this event? Absolutely nothing. And yet this is seen up and down the land. And you think of the similar thing was happening in Epping at the Bell Hotel. Okay, that was triggered by a particular incident that was misreported. And then when the hotel was ceased to be used for that purpose, that was misreported, or at least that was a bit of chicanery in a way, because in fact, that was nothing to do with the council saying, right, yeah, okay, this is just not on, we shouldn't be doing this. It was a planning issue, and that was what created the court to make that decision. So it is completely remarkable. I'm not suggesting that none of these people have valid views, but the problem that people have is knowing what to do. And so going back to your point about whether the G20 is boycotted or not, you have to be able to plot that the whole way through and think, well, what is the result of that? And my contention would be that people's efforts that day in Gloucester or wherever else, and I'm absolutely not saying, there's no point in protest. I'm saying that you have to really, really think about it and identify what your objective is and how you're going to achieve that. But just making a din outside a place where you perceive there to be either a bad thing or a good thing is not in itself ever going to change anything. And so, the sort of the organic debate, I mean, certainly in other places, I have absolutely definitely seen, the sort of the Antifa element or the opposing side totally confected. I mean, that is beyond doubt. That is absolutely just rent a mob. So this whole thing, we come back to it sort of, it's on a weekly basis. It's just look what they're making people do, which is just to scrap with each other and completely miss the point of everything, but also totally sort of get rid of their own agency by engaging in these, I'm afraid to say, sort of pointless actions. So there is, there's got to be common ground. I mean, that's a good example on the migration thing. People who say diversity is our strength and, well, if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. I think you'd have to be quite bloody minded not to see the privacy and data issues with digital identity, digital currency, the centralization of all that kind of information. So it does seem like there really should be points at which there is a sense of unity found, and that in turn could lead to meaningful actions by significant rejection of a particular scheme. But I think we've got a long way to go before that, and I think that the shenanigans around the G20 articulates that perfectly. You've just got a couple of people who are making a bit of a fuss, and that's where the attention goes rather than anything actually happening.
Well, anything actually happening is related to a question that my wife asked me this morning when I was talking about exactly this. And she asked me, okay, now if digital ID is coming via the banks and in the next couple of years you will need to scan your QR code when you enter a bank or even a restaurant or some sort of building or whatever. She asked me, what can you do about it right now? Like, what can you do?
Well, the answer isn't easy, but the answer is pretty simple. Okay, it's not easy to implement, but it's simple to express. We've got to be already building the parallel structures. That means we don't need to engage with that system. And that means, it should be fairly obvious to people what that means. It means what we've been talking about for pretty much every time we've been on this program, Jerm. That means making relationships with farmers so we can get food. It means using cash and building networks of people that can support each other without needing to engage with that system.
Hold on. Yeah, but Mike, that's correct. And I agree with you, obviously, and I promote that. But if the banks, they are retracting the amount of physical cash that's in the system, so every time you purchase something, a lot of that cash disappears because it goes back to the banks so they can swap it out with digital. Eventually, that physical cash is going to run out.
So people find other ways. I mean, it's not really rocket science. Jerm, people were trading before there was any such thing as cash. This is not something which is, well, but even in a country like the UK where we have this idea of a monopoly on cash because the Bank of England is the only bank which is allowed to print money. That doesn't stop people using some other form of token. You create your own money. There are local currencies around this country, which, we can have a discussion about who and what kind of people were driving the idea of local currencies in the past. But these things are absolutely possible. It just requires people to be thinking this way and getting organized. It is possible to trade with people without cash, if without using, the government issued cash. But the principle of cash is just an agreement between people that a particular token has a value, and that we swap this token for this particular product or this good, and so you create a parallel infrastructure. I mean, this is the danger of this is recognized by government because the UK government has made the issue of creating parallel structures and a part of the definition of extremism and terrorism, effectively. So there is a recognition at an establishment deep state level that people getting organized in this way is something which is undesirable for them. So if it's undesirable for them and they're putting it in their documentation that it's undesirable for them, we should be saying to ourselves, well, okay, let's get on with it.
Getting people organized it's just an impossible thing. Everybody was organized during COVID because they had something by which to rally around. A single unifying cause.
But I'll just yes, that's true. I'll just interrupt you there because the issue there, the difference there was the existential threat was right there in front of people. At this point in time, the existential threat, digital ID, is still something which for most people is pretty ephemeral. It's something which is starting gradually to impact people's lives, but people are still, despite the lessons that may or may not have been learned from COVIDocracy, people are still unwilling to look ahead and see what's coming and act now. They want to wait for the thing to be blattering them over the head before they're actually willing to engage. So I think what needs to happen is that the people that do have that foresight get themselves in a position that they can provide others with an answer when the time comes.
In other words, don't give up.
No, absolutely. We can't give up.
I think also one shouldn't regard this as being necessarily a sort of macro issue for all the reasons that we've been through. I mean, ultimately, you really just need to make your own plan. So if you have got somebody that will accept something other than digital money for whatever it is that you want, let's say fuel for your car that's not supposed to be on the road anymore because it has a combustion engine, you only need to find one person that's willing to do a deal with you, and then and that will in turn spark a network. I think that's how these things start, and to a certain extent, although yes, personally, I am sort of paying cash. Well, I suppose pretty much exclusively for things and whatnot. I feel like there is a pretty good network in the UK of people who do have skills and goods that would be absolutely willing, if it comes to it, to create another system, however informal. And I think this is the other thing. I think in the first instance, there doesn't need to be any great sense of sort of formality to it. We're not talking about the necessity for a centralised national system, thank goodness. I mean, I also find it slightly ironic that it is cash, which of course has no inherent value, that we've become so wedded to, and yet we talk about gold and silver quite a lot, but I think still everybody's a little bit reluctant to consider that you might actually end up spending or trading something that does have a value. But it's it is not that difficult to imagine. I mean, the way I look at this, I think now, and okay, this is yet to be demonstrated by concept or proof of concept, but I see this as an absolutely massive opportunity. If there will be people out there who absolutely do have the skills and the wherewithal to create either a parallel system, if that's what one wants to call it, or a template for doing something differently. I mean, in effect, not that I'm sponsoring this, but cryptocurrency is a very good example of that. Somebody's just created a different system, and anyone can do that. But the point is, it can be done. We don't need to look to governments or enormous corporations just to make plans for us. And equally, we don't have to have the whole country fall in line for us to think, oh right, well, okay, now I can do that. You just make the going yourself. You work out what it is you need, and how you can go about doing that. And I really do think that there is a way. You're not, not in absolutely every respect. Of course, I do concede that. I'm not being overly idealistic about it. I would hope, or overly optimistic. I think there is a degree of realism. But then again, do we? If people really sat down there with sort of pencil and paper and went through every single element that makes a contribution to their lives, do we really need all the stuff, all the things, all the accoutrements to our lives that we currently have? Probably not.
I mean, that is the existential question, though, because I think it comes down to convenience and ease of living. If the banks want you to be verified with a digital ID and you don't want that, then you have to, not bank with them. But the problem then comes in, you will need those networks already set up, in advance so that you can operate. So, for example, here in South Africa, there's no law requiring anybody to be vaccinated for anything, right? So you don't have to, by law, get an injection in your arm for anything. MMR, doesn't matter what it is, nothing. However, the private sector can implement, vaccination mandates by proxy. The schools might say, you don't have to be vaccinated, but they won't accept your child.
Yeah, but hold on a second. Who says that this is the way to live? The convenience agenda is laid down in front of us. It's convenient. You can, but who says that is the right way to be? Why are we as people looking at the world and saying this is not right? It's not being run properly. It's what's being offered is something that I don't like, but I'm still willing to consume what they give me. I'm still willing to. It doesn't matter whether it's media, Hollywood. I want the convenience of a mobile phone, a smartphone, and all the stupid social media rubbish that I consume. Right? How much of what is consumed on social media has any value to any one of us? And yet so many people spend their entire lives. I mean, they even use terms like doom scrolling. I mean, there's a recognition there that this is not healthy. And we choose bad health. We choose it. We choose it in going to McDonald's. We choose it in going to KFC. We choose it in using pharmaceutical products. We choose bad health. You're talking about the worry that your child might not be accepted in a school. Why would you want the education that they're providing? Why would that matter to you? So this is about. We've had this conversation so many times now, Jerm. This is about the choices that we make and our personal ideology, our personal morality, our personal view of the world. And it begins there.
And actually, on that, sorry, just to get, because I think, Jerm, am I right? You've interviewed Tom Cowan, is that right?
Tom Cowan, yes, a couple of times.
Yeah. Have you talked to him about education?
He believes in homeschooling and not being part of the system. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, the example that he puts in, I don't know how many books he's written, but a book of his about education. It's absolutely fascinating, and it mirrors exactly, let's say, the correlation between the exponential rise in the number of pharmaceutical products and their consumption and poor health outcomes, whatever. They absolutely are running side by side. Tom Cowan writes about this amazing discussion he has with somebody about the necessity for a formal education, and I will condense it, but basically it is to say that before any formal schooling started, the population of America by percentage had largely read the writings of Thomas Paine, and now no one has. And this was cited as being the sort of the way in which you would determine whether somebody was sort of engaged with life and educated, because they could actually understand what was being written and how important it was to the lives of people to have digested this particular text. So the point of it is that it's just like spending money that actually is not worth anything. We are so confined by our ideas that, you know, education does actually deliver what it's supposed to, when in the vast majority of cases it simply doesn't. I consider that of of myself, and I think it's very hard to look at education, certainly in the United Kingdom, as being for the benefit of really anyone but the state and the corporate entities that need slaves to make the wheel turn. So I think the scale on which we have to reconsider is so much bigger than we're liable to do, because so often the flames do appear to be licking at the front door, and therefore that's what you've got to concentrate on, rather than stepping further back to sort of crowbar the analogy yet further, and really think about all of it. And going, and again, the delight of doing that is that you can go back in time to points at which none of this stuff either existed or mattered. I went to I went down to Portsmouth recently to the docks, the historic docks, which is where they've got, some of the exhibitions there are amazing. But the Mary Rose, which was brought up in 1982, I think they got it up off the seabed and found 19,000 artifacts. But in there are some newly minted coins, gold coins, hardly ever in circulation. And you just look at that, and compared with a coin or a banknote today, obviously it's crude, it's not sophisticated, but for the people that used it, that was enough. That was absolutely fine. It meant something. They all knew what it meant. So for us to similarly create, whether it be currency or whatever it is, a different system, as long as you have in your own sort of supply chain for your life, you have an unbroken link of people that will do with you the sort of trade and interaction that you want to, and that it makes sense to all of you, well, fine, and to hell with the rest of them.
I just realized that I'm coming across as a complete normie. I'm obviously trying to provoke conversation here. I mean, I'm on the same side. A friend of mine, so he's got 2 kids. He decided with the second child not to register his child's birth. All right. So in other words, no ID number, no ID book, nothing. Doesn't want the government at all to know that this child exists. Obviously won't go to school. Both kids will be homeschooled. They stay in the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere kind of thing. And he calls it unlearning, right? So that's what he's going to teach his kids. But the reality is that child is going to be incredibly restricted from general life.
So, sorry, this friend of yours lives in South Africa?
Yes.
Yeah, so just so as I understand this, your friend lives on the biggest continent on the planet that has more to give than just about anywhere else. Is that really that they can't get on a flight? Is that a problem? I mean, they could spend their entire life traveling from one part of Africa to the next and never get back to the starting point before they die.
You could well. I mean, how'd you cross the border without an ID? That's what I'm asking.
Are you suggesting that there's border guards on every point? On every, I mean, you're talking about.
I get where you're going.
Right. So
yeah.
So the question is whether what restriction that actually provides at the end of the day, because it's only a restriction if you want to be part of the system that's being provided. And there are opportunities outside of that.
It's a brilliant example. The passport. everybody, we're all are totally conditioned to think. I mean, crikey, I know, sort of going full circle on the migration thing, because look how that works out. But the idea that you do have to go through a particular port to show your documents to make sure that everybody knows that you're going into another country. I mean, that is a very, very, in relative terms, that is a very new system that we all think is the only way to do it. I mean, crikey, there are crossing land borders in Africa, not a bother. You do not need to go through an immigration post. I can attest to that.
I mean, without making it sound utopian, it's not easy. This is an incredibly difficult path.
Well, I mean, you sort of have to qualify that, really, don't you? Yeah, I agree.
Hold on. Okay, wait, Charles.
Yeah.
Can Charles, can you operate right now without an ID?
Well, you see, the problem with that question, just to be difficult, is of course I am where I am. So let's say a lot of the stuff that I've sort of set up would have required the things that some of the things we're talking about.
Whatever. Sorry, I say ID, but I don't know what the equivalent is in your country.
I know what you mean. But it's very odd, because the whole thing sort of comes from nowhere. Because in the first instance, if you register a birth, and I'm sure it would be the same in South Africa, but if you register a birth in the United Kingdom, you get a birth certificate, but a birth certificate is not proof of identity. So the whole thing is predicated on very, very flimsy nonsense. I actually can't quite remember how you do get to the stage of proving, as it were, your identity. Because once here, it's if you have a passport or if you have a driving license, then supposedly you can prove your identity with that. But you see, you're not obliged to have a passport or a driving license. And since a birth certificate is not proof of identity, actually the whole system is fake, really.
It's totally fake, and it's predicated on, for example, the idea that you give an honest answer to your name whenever you apply for an account with the electricity company in the property that you happen to be inhabiting, and that seems to be sufficient to identify you with a bank, for example. So the whole identity thing in the first place is completely without foundation in many cases, because, as you say, your birth certificate is not proof of identity. It's often used as one of the elements in identifying yourself to an agency of some kind, but it's not. So it may be taken as proof sometimes, but it's not legally proof. So yeah, I mean, and I mean, we all know that how easy it is to create a fake identity. The intelligence agencies do it all the time. The police, I guess, do it if they're going undercover. So it's not hard to create a fake identity. The question is whether we should be doing much more of that. Maybe that's another option for fighting back.
Yes, in other words, rather than one person out of 100,000 not registering the kids, 100,000 people should not be registering the kids. I mean, what's actually going to happen? What will the state do? Yeah,
quite. That's it. And the whole idea of proving your identity is again, it's utterly sort of disingenuous. It's not because anyone needs to know who you are. They just need to know what you're doing, and those are two totally different things. I mean, I think I said before how ridiculous it is now that we're sort of being led to believe that biometrics and stuff is so important, because otherwise you just can't be sure. And the first time I travelled for any great length of time through Africa, it was on a passport that was just on the cusp of running out. So it was nearly 10 years old. So it had a picture of a picture of an 8-year-old child, and it was when they used to record height in the passport, and I think I was, whatever I was nearly 50 centimeters taller than the thing, and yet at no point did any of the many border officials that I handed it to, no one looked at it and thought, okay, but that's a photograph of a short child, and that's not who you are, but we'll let you through anyway. So we have, that's what's been used to convince us that these technological advancements are for our convenience, but sort of security and safety. Well, it's absolute rubbish. I mean, I know you've spoken to Ian Davis recently about specifically this on the digital identity front, and it's just it's marketing. The whole way in which this stuff is being sold is utterly disingenuous, absolute rubbish.
There's an interesting history behind digital ID. I don't know if you know who actually came up with the idea. It'll be on one of my upcoming shows. I spoke to a guy who runs a tech company in the States. I won't go into it now. But he was chatting briefly about the guy who came up with the idea. It was about 20 years ago. And it was noble in its intent. And then it was quickly bought by Microsoft. The idea of the state giving you an ID seems quite contradictory. But the idea of a decentralized, personalized identification, it does seem like a good idea.
Sorry, are you saying that's something, therefore, that's not controlled by the state?
Yes.
Right, okay. Yeah, well, again, that's another sort of element that again, doesn't really get considered. Why should it be, why should it be the state telling me who I am, in effect, by virtue of the fact that they issue the birth certificate or the passport or the driving license to say, yes, you are this person? Or surely it's up to me to decide if I am that person or indeed who I say I am.
The original question was, do we need to, or at least at some point, the question was, do we need to engage with the system? We got into a conversation about how we might not. But of course, we can still engage with the system and with a view to disrupting it. And of course, in order to do that, we've got to probably get ourselves fully engaged with the digital ID and so on. But I've told this story many times. A lot of years ago, a guy in Plymouth here not paying his council tax and trying to establish on what basis he had to pay his council tax and what was the process that he would go through if he refused to pay and so on. And he took it to the court and we attended as witnesses on the day just to see what happened. And the first thing that I realized was, as I walked into the court, was that in the foyer outside the actual courtroom, there were half a dozen council employees there to try to negotiate with anybody that turned up at the court that day to try to set up a payment plan or whatever it was. But the last thing they wanted was anybody actually going into the court and offering any kind of defense. They were effectively hiring the court for the day, and they wanted to go in with their spreadsheet of non-payers and to get a blanket order from the court that they could proceed with taking those names to bailiffs or whatever to recover the debt collection agencies and so on. So it was obvious that on that particular day, I think there were something like 1,500 people on that list, that if 1,500 people had turned up to the courtroom that day, the entire system would have collapsed under its own weight, right? And no matter what we think about the legislation that is in place at the moment with respect to data protection, for example, the legislation is there, and one of the tools that is provided by that legislation is something, and this as far as the UK is concerned. Other countries have similar situations. One of the things in the UK that we have at our disposal is the subject access request, where we can make an application to any body, whether that be a corporate body or a public body, and say, what is the data that you hold on me? And they are required to, within 20 working days, provide you with a copy of everything that they have about you. Now, if we do that in a systematic way, we bring the entire system to a halt. Now, whether they can implement some form of artificial intelligence-based mechanism for dealing with these at some point in the future, they can't do it today. So the aim should be, if what we're saying is that we don't like this technocratic system which is being developed, the aim should be at the very least to slow it down. And the way that we slow it down is that we keep it so tied up in knots, responding to requests and similar sorts of things, that it can't, people can't progress the thing because they're so busy all the time. A lot of, right back at the very beginning when the supermarkets in the United States and the United Kingdom started producing loyalty cards, and they were, you got your loyalty card, which allowed them to then associate the specific items that you were buying with your identity. People were saying, well, this is insane. Looking back on it now, it seems utterly tame compared to what we have at the moment. But people were sticking those cards in the post to each other and deliberately attempting to make the data that was being collected worthless to the supermarket, because 1 week I was buying stuff in Plymouth, the next week I was buying stuff in Manchester, or the next week I was buying stuff in Washington DC, and I was buying different stuff every time. So the principle behind that was to poison the database, and this is exactly the right approach. It's something that nobody is really doing at this point.
I think because people are scared.
People have got to stop being scared. People can be scared and sit and shiver in the corner, but that's not going to stop anything. So what are you scared of? Are you scared of what's coming? Well, it isn't here yet, so don't be scared of it now. Fight it, and then it never arrives. I mean, we've got to make a decision. It all comes down to us making individual decisions. We talked about this so many times.
I think that is probably the ultimate solution, Mike. When people say, but
no, the ultimate solution, Jerm, is that we have to be fighting on every front. We can't just do I'm going to buy stuff from a local farmer, or I'm going to find a way to trade locally with like-minded people. We can't just do that. We've got to also do the other thing. So, I think in reality, to some degree, we should be certainly working to minimize any interface that we have with the system, but to some degree, we've got to make a decision to how much interface we do have with it, and what we're going to do with that interface. And in the meantime, I think we should be using it as much as we can to disrupt it as much as we can.
Also, I think it is interesting to consider, because we rather moved on, but the friend you're talking about who's planning to bring up a child, in effect, with no, sort of outside of the system. I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to their sense of purpose and happiness, joy, and love in life. Why should we associate being outside of all the control mechanisms that we want to get away from be synonymous with having a sort of miserable, unfulfilling life? I don't see that it should be at all. I think, yes, okay, we have got used to being able to do whatever it is, buy something with a credit card and immediately get on a flight to the other side of the world, or this, that, and the other. But to say that we derive a higher pleasure in life from being able to do that, I think is a hard one to argue. So I think just again a reevaluation of what a fulfilling life may actually entail is something that we should do. It is interesting how frequently it comes back to the sort of rural-urban divide, because I think a lot of what we do talk about, people are necessarily constrained by where they physically are, and I'm I don't think anyone should be sort of criticizing other people's life decisions, but I have a bias inherent just because I do live outside of urban areas, and pretty much always have done, and therefore I can see. For my part, I can see exactly how a life can work outside of the urban environment, and to me, really, given certain conditions, like if you have got sufficient materials with which to educate yourself, your family, this, that, and the other, and you've got a source of food and a means of transport, then you sort of are sorted. How that quite compares to, or in an urban environment, I don't really know. I think what would be very interesting.
The other thing, Charles, is that there is a practical reality here. Other land masses have better opportunities, but in the UK, if we've got 70 million people here and everybody wanted to live a rural life, that ain't going to work.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Totally. I mean, and that's the thing. We do return to the sort of we are where we are. What I was about to say was I would be very interested to hear from somebody who feels that they are in a way protected from all the things that we're talking about, but that they do live in an urban environment, that they do have access to food that they may not be growing on their own property, but that whether via an allotment and this, that, and the other, and that they are in some ways perhaps bartering or entering into different types of trade agreements and don't feel that they're reliant on the sorts of things that I think in the countryside I don't feel I'm reliant on. It'd be really interesting. I mean, there must be people there who do sort of fall into that category, but I'm not sure I really know any. Interesting area.
Well, we're coming in for landing, and just to horseshoe to the start of the conversation, this is the kind of conversation that I wish more South Africans were having, rather than black, white, black, white, black, white the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep saying this. We got to stop thinking in terms of black, white, left, right, and thinking about looking up and at who is actually pulling the puppet strings on so many, and actually working out that black, white, we're actually on the same side. and
there is no left, right.
Precisely.
Great chatting, Charles, Mike. I'll catch up with you next week.